Marvel just broke its own ending. Back in 2019, Avengers Endgame gave Steve Rogers the cleanest exit in the history of superhero movies. He hands off the shield. He grows old. He gets his dance with Peggy. Credits roll. Nobody touches it again. That was the deal. Except now there's a new trailer, and Chris Evans is standing right there in it. And Thor is looking at him like he's seen a ghost. So here's the question nobody at Marvel wants to answer yet. Is that actually Steve Rogers? Or did the studio just hand us the most elaborate misdirect since Mysterio's drone show? Stick with me, because once you line up everything in this trailer next to what's already in the comics, the easy explanation starts falling apart fast. Let's rebuild the timeline first, because the order of events here actually matters. Endgame ends with an old Steve Rogers on a bench. Shield gone. Life lived. Sam Wilson takes over as Captain America. Chris Evans said goodbye. Multiple times, publicly, he made it clear he didn't want to undo that ending, because it meant something. Then late last year, the first Doomsday teaser drops. No warning. Steve pulls up on a motorcycle to a house. He walks in. He picks up his old uniform. And then in the very last shot, he's holding a baby. Presumably his and Peggy's kid, from the life he built after going back in time. That's it. That's the whole teaser. No dialogue. Just a man, a house, a suit, and a child, scored with this quiet, almost funeral version of the Avengers theme. At the time, fans read that as sweet. A nice little coda, some closure on the family life he never got to have on screen. Now, with the full trailer out, that same image reads completely differently. Because we know what happens next. Thor shows up, or Steve shows up to Thor. And suddenly Steve Rogers isn't retired anymore. He's back in the fight against a guy played by Robert Downey Jr., who used to play Tony Stark and who is now playing Doctor Doom. Let that sink in for a second, because it's genuinely one of the strangest casting choices in blockbuster history. The actor who died saving the universe from Thanos is now playing the universe's next big villain. Marvel clearly loves messing with our heads on a meta level. Keep that in mind. It's going to matter later. Okay, the actual scene. Here's what happens. Thor is rallying basically every hero Marvel has ever put on screen. X-Men, the Fantastic Four, Wakanda, whatever's left of the original Avengers. And in the middle of this pep talk, he says something that stopped a lot of fans cold. He says nothing has ever scared him like this. That they've beaten worse odds before, sure, but always with better weapons on their side. Now they don't have those weapons. Now they need something closer to a miracle. And then the trailer gives him one. Steve Rogers walks up. Thor turns around. He can't process it. This is a man he watched die of old age off screen, essentially. A man whose story was finished. Thor says it's impossible. And Steve's response isn't words. He just reaches out, and Mjolnir flies out of Thor's hand and into his. If you know your MCU history, that's not a small moment. That hammer has one rule. Only the worthy can lift it. Steve proved he could do it once before, in Endgame, in this tiny blink-and-you-miss-it shot during the final battle. It was one of the biggest fan service reveals in that entire movie. So the trailer is using that exact same trick again here, as a kind of built-in proof of identity. Look, he can lift the hammer, so it has to be him. Case closed, right? Except that's exactly the part one don't buy. Here's the thing about proof in a franchise built entirely around multiverses, variants, illusions, and reality-warping villains. Nothing is proof anymore. Marvel has spent 5 years training us not to trust the first explanation. And it's not just me being paranoid here. Go look at how fans reacted online the moment this trailer dropped. The reunion got called out almost instantly for feeling too clean, too easy, too much like a bow on a gift box, when everything else about this movie is built around chaos, betrayal, and a villain who's supposed to be the smartest man in any universe. Multiple entertainment outlets picked up on the exact same thing within hours. One breakdown specifically pointed out that Chris Evans has this look on his face right as he lifts the hammer that reads less like triumphant hero and more like someone who knows exactly what he's doing and is enjoying it a little too much. That's not me reading too far into a screenshot. That's a documented reaction from people who've now watched this frame by frame, slowed down, paused, and compared against his expressions from Endgame. There's also a smaller detail worth flagging. Sam Wilson still has the shield in this trailer. If Steve were simply resuming his old identity as Captain America, you'd expect some kind of handoff moment, or at least a shot acknowledging it. Instead, Sam keeps the shield, and Steve shows up without it. That's either meaningless, or it's Marvel quietly telling us this isn't a straightforward legacy handoff. Maybe Steve isn't coming back as Captain America at all. Maybe he's coming back as something else entirely, closer to the nomad identity comic fans have wanted to see on screen for years. None of that proves a twist by itself. But stack it up, and you've got a trailer that's working very hard to convince you of something, using the exact tool the comics have already shown can be faked. So let's talk about how you'd actually fake the Mjolnir test, because Marvel Comics has already done it. On the page, there was a storyline called Secret Empire, where Hydra had a version of Captain America running around, and yes, that version could lift the hammer too. Reality itself had been rewritten. The enchantment Odin placed on Mjolnir, the one that only allows worthy hands to lift it, got altered along with everything else, so that whoever Hydra considered the strongest could carry it. Translate that into what Doomsday is already dealing with. Multiple universes colliding. A villain whose entire comic book identity revolves around bending reality and rewriting the rules other people live by. If Dr. Doom, or whoever's really pulling strings here, can mess with a hammer's worthiness clause the same way Hydra once did, then Steve lifting Mjolnir stops being proof of anything. It becomes exactly the kind of trick a rewritten reality would produce. Under this version of events, the Steve we're looking at could be a darker variant. Someone who looks like our Steve, sounds like our Steve, but is quietly working with Doom the entire time. It would explain that look on his face. It would explain why the return feels so oddly frictionless for a character who should be dealing with a mountain of emotional baggage about coming back at all. Now here's the one that actually has fresh evidence behind it, and it comes from a completely different corner of the trailer. Loki is in this footage too. First time we've properly seen him since his own show wrapped its second season back in 2023. And in the scene we get, he's holding his old TVA card, standing in a house, looking like a man about to do something he's not fully sure of. Remember how Loki Season 2 ended? He became something like the guardian of the entire multiverse's timeline, sacrificing basically everything about his old self to hold that structure together. It was one of the more surprising redemption arcs the MCU has pulled off. This is not the same character who tried to conquer Earth in the first Avengers movie. So picture this. Loki, the god of mischief turned reluctant protector of all reality, shows up at Steve's house. Not to fight him, to ask for help. And what does Loki do better than literally anyone else in this franchise? He wears other people's faces. He's done it as Captain America before, in Infinity War, as a distraction gag that fans still bring up constantly. What if this entire reunion with Thor isn't Steve at all? What if it's Loki, wearing Steve's face, specifically because Thor needs to see that face to be pulled back from the edge? Thor watched his own brother die in Infinity War. He's carrying that. If Loki shows up as himself, mid-crisis, it might not land the way it needs to. But if he shows up as Steve Rogers, the man Thor trusted completely, it hits different. It's a calculated act of using the one face guaranteed to make Thor listen. And as for lifting the hammer, a god who's spent years growing into an entirely new purpose, who's arguably done more to earn redemption than almost anyone else in this franchise, being worthy enough to hold Mjolnir for one scene isn't exactly a stretch anymore if there's a simpler option too. And simple doesn't mean boring here. This movie is explicitly about heroes from different universes colliding. We already know Dr. Doom himself may be connected to a completely separate Earth, based on how Fantastic Four set things up. If Doom can hop universes, there's no reason Steve can't be an alternate version too. Not evil, not corrupted, just a Steve Rogers who lived a different life in a different timeline and got pulled into this fight the same way everyone else did. That version is honestly the least dramatic option on this list, but it would still completely undercut the idea that our specific Steve, the one who retired to be with Peggy, is walking back into the field. It would mean the emotional reunion we're all expecting isn't quite what it looks like either. Here's why I think Marvel is doing this on purpose, and not just teasing a twist for the sake of a twist. The Russo brothers, who are directing this movie, have talked publicly about Steve's return in almost reverent terms, calling him the character that shaped this whole universe. That's not the kind of language you use if you're planning to just wheel him out for a cheap cameo and a hammer lift. That's the language of directors setting up something they know is going to be picked apart frame by frame for months. And they've got every incentive to do exactly that. This isn't a one-off movie. Doomsday leads straight into Secret Wars, the next Avengers film already locked in for 2027. If there's a version of Steve Rogers running around who isn't quite what he seems, that's not a twist you burn in Act 1. That's a thread you pull slowly across 2 movies, while half the internet argues about it in real time. Which, frankly, is exactly what's happening right now. So where does that leave us? We've got 3 real possibilities on the table. A corrupted or Hydra-aligned version of Steve, using a manipulated Mjolnir the same way Marvel's comics already showed was possible. Loki, wearing Steve's face, using the one identity guaranteed to reach Thor in his lowest moment. Or a genuine alternate universe Steve, pulled sideways instead of resurrected. Any one of those would completely change how that reunion plays on screen. And honestly, even if I'm wrong about all 3, the fact that this many fans and this many outlets landed on the exact same suspicion within hours of the trailer dropping tells you something. Marvel built a moment that's designed to be doubted. Avengers. Doomsday hits theaters December 18th. We'll know soon enough whether Steve Rogers really walked back into this fight, or whether Marvel just pulled its biggest bait and switched yet. Which theory do you think it is? Drop it in the comments, because I want to see how many people land on Loki versus Hydra Steve versus straight-up variant. And if you want more breakdowns like this the second any new footage drops, you know what to do. I'll see you in the next one.